one of the strangest, most fascinating yet horrifying things you could experience. It's the feeling of being unable to move upon awakening. Your senses and awareness are intact, but you still feel as though you're in this half-asleep, half-awake limbo. I'd read about sleep paralysis long before it happened to me, but nothing could have prepared me. I've only experienced it once. I was in my sophomore year, going through an incredibly tough time. My mom had passed from pancreatic cancer just 3 weeks prior, and I was trying to power through finals week. I was insanely stressed, surviving on coffee and vending machine snacks, maybe getting 3 hours of fractured sleep a night. It must have been the night before my last final, organic chemistry. I'd been in the library until 2 a.m., my brain a tangled mess of formulas and grief. I don't remember the walk back to my dorm or even changing my clothes. I just remember the highlighters and textbooks on my desk becoming a blur of color, then blackness. The next thing I knew, I was in my room, in my bed, but there was this thick, chemical haze in my awareness, like my thoughts were swimming through syrup. I was awake, but I felt drained, weaker than I'd ever felt. When I tried to sit up or even twitch a finger, I couldn't. Panic, cold and sharp, bloomed in my chest. I could only move my eyes, frantically scanning the familiar shadows of my room to desk, the poster, the glow of my laptop charger. At one point, my gaze drifted to the window overlooking the rainy campus. When I looked back to the center of the room, she was there, a woman standing dead center, facing the bed. She was wearing a simple, elegant black dress, the kind my mom wore to church, and she was holding long, slender objects that looked like white lilies. My heart screamed, "Mom," but my throat was sealed shut by the paralysis. I couldn't make a sound. She glided closer, not walking, until she knelt beside my bed. I felt the slight dip of the mattress. Then, she reached out and touched my forehead. Her fingers were ice cold, but the touch was gentle. She leaned in, getting eye to eye with me, and in the faint light from the parking lot outside, I could see her face clearly. It was my mother's face, but younger, peaceful, without the marks of her illness. Her eyes held a deep, infinite sadness. I tried with every fiber of my being to say "Mom," to reach for her, but I was a prisoner in my own flesh. She gave the faintest, most sorrowful smile, stood up, and walked to my dorm room door. She didn't open it. She simply faded through it, disappearing into the silent hallway. I lay there, trapped, for what felt like another eternity, maybe. 20 seconds before the veil suddenly lifted, my vision snapped into crystal clarity. I gasped a ragged breath and shot upright in bed. "Mom!" I screamed, the word finally tearing free. "Mom!" I scrambled out of bed, stumbling into the hallway of the quiet dorm. "Mom, please." A door down the hall creaked open. It was my roommate, Alex, his hair mussed with sleep. He saw my face, saw the raw terror and hope, and without a word, he just hugged me. "Hey man," he murmured, his voice rough. "It's okay. I miss her too. My mom died 3 weeks before this happened." You know what I love about dreams? How vague and bizarre they can be. You feel like you're in a separate world where logic just quits. Now, what about when that unearthliness transcends into the quote-unquote real world? You'll see what I mean. I was in REM sleep, having this bizarre, frustrating nightmare about being followed by some skittering, many-legged creature through the pine forests near Mount Lemon. The dream became staticky, though, and I kind of woke up from it. I say kinda because while I was out of the forest and back in my old bed in Tucson, I couldn't move a muscle. My body was a concrete slab. Then I heard it. A faint, weird noise. It was this indescribable sound of metallic, grinding war, like a broken robot trying to vocalize. But underneath it was a wet, organic gurgle. It started light and soft, a mere whisper in the dark. Then it repeated, every 3 seconds. Suddenly, I noticed with dawning horror that it was getting slightly louder every time. It wasn't just in my head. It felt like the sound was physically getting closer, moving from the corner of the room toward my bed. It grew until it was unbearably loud, vibrating in my skull. I just wanted to scream to shatter the noise, but my jaw was locked. Then my eyes, against my will, locked onto my closet door. Specifically, the 2-inch crack I never leave open. I'm obsessive about closing it fully. But it was open now, and in that sliver of deeper blackness, there was a face, a distorted man's face, pale and waxy, pressed into the crack. It had an unhumanly large, stretched open smile, filled with shadows where teeth should be. And every time I heard the sound, the face and the entire closet seemed to lurch a foot closer to my bed, warping the perspective of the room. The closet was at the foot of the bed. The face was looming over me, that impossible smile now a foot wide. The closet door slammed shut with a force that shook the wall. A few seconds later, the iron grip on my body released. I was 24 years old, but I flew out of that bed and ran down the hall to my parents' room. I shook my dad awake, babbling. He came back with me, baseball bat in hand, and threw the closet door open. Nothing. Just my hanging clothes and old shoes, boxers. He put an arm around my shoulders. "Chloe," he said, calm, but serious. "I think you just had sleep paralysis. It happened to me once after my surgery. Saw a shadow person in the corner." His explanation was logical, comforting, but it didn't erase the memory of that grinding, gurgling noise, or the feeling that something had been measuring the distance to me. I've suffered sleep paralysis a total of 3 times. The first 2 were classic waking up, can't move, sense of dread, over in a minute. The third time was a different beast. It was a cool gray Portland morning, very early, maybe 5:30 a.m. The sun was just beginning to bleed light into my studio apartment, casting everything in a dull, blue-gray monochrome. I woke up, or thought I did, and tried to turn over. That's when the familiar, leaden feeling seized me. Paralyzed. Helpless. I could only stare at the blank white wall across from my bed, listening to my own heartbeat thump in my ears. Then, I heard the heavy, deliberate footsteps coming up the wooden stairs from the building's shared hallway. They reached my door, and without the sound of a knob turning, the door swung open. In walked my family. My younger brother, Liam, first. Then my sister Maya. Then my dad. Finally, my mom. They filed in silently, but they were all wrong. Each one was at least a foot taller than they should be, their heads nearly brushing my 9-foot ceiling, and they were all sobbing uncontrollably, shoulders shaking, tears streaming down their elongated, distorted faces. No sound came out. Just the awful, silent performance of utter despair. The 4 of them approached my bed and stopped at the bedside, forming a wall of weeping, stretched out grief, towering over me. I couldn't move. I wanted to cry out, "What's wrong? What happened?" But my voice was gone. I wanted to yell at them to stop because they're terrifying. Silent crying and their unnatural heights were freezing the blood in my veins. They just stood there, looking down at me for an eternity. Then, as one, they all turned and walked back out the door, their footsteps receding down the stairs. The paralysis broke. I launched out of bed and ran to the door, flinging it open. The hallway was empty, quiet. I ran to my phone and called my brother. It went to voicemail. I called my sister. Voicemail. It was 5:45 a.m. Of course, but the image was seared into me. I couldn't go back to sleep. I just sat by the window, watching the sun rise, a deep, unshakable unease sitting in my gut. 4 days later, I was crossing Burnside Street with friends after grabbing coffee. A speeding delivery van, its driver distracted, ran a red light. I was the one who got hit. I ended up with 3 broken ribs, a fractured collarbone, and a shattered femur. I was hospitalized for a week. One afternoon, heavy on painkillers, I drifted awake in the hospital bed. Standing around me, looking down with worried, tearful faces, were my brother, my sister, my dad, and my mom. The afternoon sun streamed in behind them, casting their faces in shadow, making them seem tall. My mom was crying quietly. The déjà vu was so violent it stole my breath. It was almost the exact image from my sleep paralysis. I'm not a superstitious person. I believe in stress and coincidence, but in that moment, hooked two machines. With my family's tearful faces hovering above me, I felt a shiver run down my spine. If I were superstitious, I'd believe 100% that my mind had somehow sketched a preview of my own trauma. In fact, I just got chills again writing this last sentence, thinking about it. There was this one time I was out late drinking with friends in the historic district. It was a hot, sticky summer night. We'd left the bars and were just wandering, laughing too loud, through the old residential streets with their giant oaks and Spanish moss. That's when my friend Jocks pointed and said, "Dude, look." We all squinted. In front of a grand, columned Victorian house, hidden deep within a massive azalea bush, was a shape, a person-sized shape, crouching perfectly still. We crept closer, the group bravado mixing with genuine creepiness. When we got within 10 feet, a sound started coming from the bush. It wasn't a human sound. It was a low, rhythmic chittering, like a massive insect, mixed with the static of a broken radio. We all screamed half in genuine fright, half in drunken hysterics, and ran all the way back to our houses, laughing about the bush monster. I crashed into bed, drunk enough to fall asleep instantly, but I woke up what felt like minutes later to the perfect, suffocating pitch black of my room. I couldn't move. I couldn't even turn my head to see the time. Sleep paralysis. Great. Then I heard it. The same exact chitter-static noise from the azalea bush. It wasn't outside. It was in the corner of my room. My eyes darted toward the foot of my bed. That's when I saw pure nightmare fuel. It appeared to be just a floating head, at first grotesque, hairless, with skin the color of a week-old bruise. Its eyes were solid black pools, and its mouth was a slack, dark hole. As it glided closer, I realized it had a body, but it was cloaked in a darkness so absolute it absorbed the faint light from the window, making its form indistinct and terrifying. It was the thing from the bush. It floated to the side of my bed, that awful chitter-static noise pouring from its open mouth. It leaned in, closer, closer, until its face was mere inches from mine. I could smell a scent like ozone and damp soil. Its black eyes held no intelligence, only a hollow, hungry void. Then, it simply faded away, like smoke dissolving in air. The paralysis released. I screamed, a raw, guttural sound, and scrambled for the lamp. Light flooded the room. Nothing. I told my parents the next day over biscuits and gravy. They agreed it was sleep paralysis, my brain recycling the night's weird event. Still, my mom added, looking unsettled, I've never heard of anyone seeing something so specific. What I experienced felt more real than any dream. It felt like a visitation, and sometimes, on very dark, quiet Georgia nights, I still think about the thing in the azalea bush and wonder if it was ever really hiding from us, or just waiting to be seen.